And then when you're able, if you can switch over next,
Yes.
Bill, Anne Marie, Matt, that would be helpful. And then I see also welcome Maureen Callahan from Representative Garlick's office. Thank you very much for joining. I'm going to call the meeting to order, even though we can't see each other except Amy. And she's going to try and resolve that technological issue, but we'll proceed in any event. Good morning and welcome. I'm Adam Block, Chair of the Council of Economic Advisors. This open meeting of the Council of Economic Advisors is being conducted remotely, consistent with state regulations, and is being recorded. Public access to this meeting does not ensure that there will be public participation unless required by law. This particular meeting, we do not anticipate having public comment. First, we'll confirm that all members are present for the select board, and then we'll also make sure that we have our staff with us. When I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Stu Agler.
Here.
Very good. Tina.
Here.
Glenn.
Here.
Bill Day.
Here.
Anne Marie Dowd.
Here.
Lise.
Here.
Thank you. And Mo.
Here.
Very good. Bob.
Here.
David Montgomery.
Here.
Rick.
Here.
Matt Talkoff.
Here.
Mike.
Here.
Very good. Virginia.
Here.
And Adam Meisner.
Here.
I heard you there. Very good. Okay. Thank you all very much. For others participating in the meeting, please also be aware that others may be able to see you. Anything you share or state will be a matter of public record. All supporting materials for this meeting, including the agenda, are available on the town's website at needhamma.gov, unless otherwise noted. In terms of some meeting ground rules, the ground rules for this meeting are designed to allow for an accurate public record. When you speak, if you could please say your name first, that would be helpful. And we will begin. Good morning, everybody. Again, thanks for coming. Amy's continuing to play with our technical issue. But yeah, I would also say probably, Amy, if in a minute you can't resolve it, let's just move forward this
Okay.
way. So we have our minutes from our January 6th meeting. I've reviewed them. There were a couple of little typo things that were very minor that Amy's corrected. Did anybody have any other comments about the minutes? I didn't see any comments from anybody else. Sounds like we don't have any comments. So could I have a motion to approve the minutes of January 6th?
This is Mo Handel, so move.
And thank you, Mo. Do I have a second?
Second, Rick Putbrush.
Thanks, Rick. Appreciate that. So we have a motion. We have a second. Any discussion? Hearing no discussion, we'll go to the vote. I'll do a roll call. When I call your name, please respond either in the affirmative or the negative. Stu.
Approved.
Tina.
Yes.
Glenn.
Yes.
Bill.
Yes.
Anne Marie. Lise.
Yes.
Mo.
Yes.
Bob. David Montgomery.
Yes.
Rick.
Yes.
Matt.
Yes.
Mike.
Yes.
Virginia.
Yes.
Adam Meisner.
Yes.
And I'm going to go back to Anne Marie Dowd. And
Sorry, I was muted.
What's that?
Sorry, I was muted.
No problem. Did I miss anybody else?
Henschel.
Bob? Maybe you're muted.
I said
Bob.
yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah, now
Hello?
we can. We're good. Thank you very much. So the chair is aye. The motion is unanimously passed. And we have dispensed with the minutes. Thank you all very much. So ordinarily, we've been having at this time our public director of health give us a very full update on what's happening with the coronavirus in town, and that's been very helpful. And yet, it's also taken us a little bit sideways from our core mission. So unless there is some major activity that's going to fundamentally change everything, particularly business in town, instead, Amy and Tim at the Public Health will have a conversation. And now Amy's going to provide us with a brief update about what's happening with the coronavirus and particularly how it's affecting us in town. Amy?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. So this is per Tim McDonald, the Director of Public Health for the town of Needham. So Needham is in the yellow. Its average daily case rate per 100,000 over the last 2 weeks is 37.4. Its percent positive testing rate is 2.6. So both numbers are trending down and have for the past 3 weeks. There is a public health campaign that has been organized by the town in conjunction with Public Health Department, as well as Cindy Gonzalez, the Public Information Officer. And part of that campaign has been messaging that you have likely seen on sandwich board signs around town, and banner on Town Hall, some signage on some grocery stores and other stores around town, including 2,000 free masks that were distributed to the public via grocery stores, as well as to restaurant workers and to town employees. So I had the pleasure of personally delivering the masks to the grocery stores, which include, of course, Roach Brothers, Sudbury Farms, Needham General Store, Volante Farms, and Trader Joe's. And they actually, as if it was, Christmas or another holiday, that I was giving them something, because they were so happy to be able to pass them out to their customers. And in fact, Needham General Store went through 100 masks in just a couple of days. So the town ordered more have come in, and so we've distributed more to those who need them. So the Needham Needs You logo is on the mask, and they've been very well received. And we've asked folks to take photos of themselves and use the hashtag #MaskUpNeedham. So it's been a great campaign thus far. And it's, again, given me the excuse to go in and speak to these businesses one-on-one, firsthand check in to see how they're doing. Let's see, there's also no new social media ads aimed at teens, which if you haven't seen yet, they're on the town's website and also on the town's social media accounts. They're really terrific. They're using the messaging sort of like, let's sort of all sacrifice now to have fun later, as well as messaging, you may feel safe, but if you're not wearing your mask, think about the others that you might impact. So take a moment to check them out. Really well done. See, the restrictions on businesses reduced that were announced by Governor Baker that were effective this past Monday, February 8th. They lifted the 25% capacity restriction, which is now up to 40%. And restaurants, their seating capacity is back up to 40%. And employees do not count towards this limit. There's no capacity limits in manufacturing, construction, laboratories. These sectors never actually had any limits. The gathering orders from the state, they remain at 10 people indoors and 25 outdoor. And then the Commonwealth remains in phase 3, step 1 of reopening orders from the Commonwealth. Vaccinations as of Monday, the 8th, from the town of Needham, they have administered over 1,600 doses. First doses, I should say, and second doses are 61 for a total of about 1,700 doses that have been administered from the Public Health Department. And they have done a fabulous job at organizing a very well-run clinic that has received a lot of positive feedback. So hats off to everyone involved to make that happen. So that's the report on the COVID state of emergency.
Amy, thank you very much. I note that you mentioned, as we've seen before, that restaurants, the capacity for restaurants has risen recently to 40%.
Correct.
Do we have any information on how many of our restaurants are actually achieving that 40% capacity?
Very few, very few. So as I mentioned, I've been in regular contact with them, and primarily the business at the local restaurants is takeout. And they are having some sit-down business, but most of them aren't even coming close to the 40%.
Lise, I know that you're having some, I think there's some construction work happening outside. I don't know if you can hear me or not, but, and if you're able to talk, I'll give you a second. I'd be curious to know what your experience is like from your membership, not just in Needham, but also in Wellesley and Newton now. Are they finding restaurants able to achieve 40% capacity, or is it still significantly below that?
Significantly below, and that's mainly from Newton Needham. We're just expanding into Wellesley and making relationships there, so I don't have good feedback from Wellesley. And I would say the restaurants, we are having meetings every Tuesday morning. There was a very long meeting yesterday. They're thinking they're setting all their sights on spring. There's going to be a big like patio opening day trying to coordinate across all the towns to just celebrate the outdoors. The second round of PPP is coming in huge for these restaurants. If they're able to get it, they can sleep at night. Shauna just said, she's okay till March, and she's just been huge. So we're getting those kind of anecdotal. And I apologize. The construction is coming from inside my house, so
Okay.
I'm going to mute myself again because the banging is very loud.
Thank you very much. That's actually helpful. That's good to know. So now what I'd like to do is just roundtable again, as we typically do, and get a clearer sense of what's happening in our subsectors in the real estate space. I'd love to, if I can, I'll call on Mike first, and then Adam Meisner. Mike, what's your experience been here in Needham and from some of your other properties in other towns?
I would just continue to tell you that activity is reduced from normal levels, of course, but there is some activity. Anecdotally, I had an interesting sort of situation with a tenant that may tell you all about how some of the corporate office users are thinking about their space. We have a project at Chapel Bridge in Newton, over in West Newton, that existing tenant, they're in sort of the consumer product business, and they've expanded in the past, and they came to me and looked to see if he could expand again, which, obviously is very encouraging. We engaged an architect and did a plan, and I provided a proposal, and they're in about 10,000 square feet, and they're looking at taking almost as much space. And then like a couple of weeks later, when I went to get feedback, he said, I think we're going to go in a different direction. We're going to take our existing space and retrofit it, and essentially bring in half the staff on 2 days a week and the other half the staff on the other 2 days a week. So they're basically sort of doubling down on their existing space, and bringing people in shifts. So obviously something like that has a major impact on how much space tenants may look to use. I don't necessarily say that it's indicative of how all tenants are looking to use their space, but if you get enough of those, it would obviously result in somewhat of a negative impact on absorption and whatnot. So it's just, I think, an interesting side note. And, I would just say from my perspective, it's still kind of early on to sort of say, I'm going to spend a lot of money to retrofit my space. And that's money they're spending. We're not sort of funding it and doing a new transaction. And in that regard, it just is sort of interesting that people are making the decisions before they're actually back in the office. And you know, and it's probably in preparation of going back, but at the same time, it's just sort of telling of how corporate offices are looking at utilization of their space. So the only other thing I would add, we have a building at 117 Kendrick. It's a one-story high ceiling building. Years ago as the Polaroid warehouse. We've engaged some consultants in that project to look at, we do have one biotech tenant there. And we're looking at maybe positioning space that we have coming available this year for lab use as well. And if any of you have been following sort of the news, the lab market is just like gangbusters, and Grove Street, Newton is looking at it, as well as a lot of locations in Watertown, Waltham, Lexington. Those are all sort of suburban hotbeds for the lab market. And most people don't think that all of the lab that people are basically sort of positioning to deliver is going to happen, but it just sort of shows you where the herd mentality is in the real estate business now, that the office side is going to be very quiet, and it's going to be, as we've talked about before, both lab and warehouse logistics space.
Adam, your audio is not on. There you go.
Sorry,
All right.
there we go.
Well, first of all, I'm glad to see everybody's faces. Amy, thanks for fixing. I apologize for the mute, but Mike, that's helpful.
Adam, I had a question for Mike.
Go ahead.
Mike, from the standpoint of term, what are you seeing any activity now? Are they looking for shorter term leases, or are landlords demanding, 5 years and up? How's that going?
I mean, we try to be reactive to what tenants are looking for. And I will say, we've done a number of transactions that have been 5 and 7 year leases in the last, few months. But it's tough to just generalize, but I would say on the tech side, if any of our tenants, a lot of the tenants that we have that have leases expired are asking to go short while they try and figure out what they're going to do. So I've given 1 year extensions and another 18-month extension to different lab tenants, because I think, unlike the example I provided, they're still trying to figure out, I think, what they want to be and how they want to configure and use their space going forward. But I will also add that, just the vibe that I get, we got an RFP for a group looking to take a good amount of space, and the whole request for proposal was predicated upon when we can go back to the office. So there wasn't a date of like August 1 or September 1. It's just like whenever we can go back and use the space, that would be the commencement date. So, I mean, people are sort of lining up on, I think, late summer, fall for maybe going back into the office in bigger numbers.
Thanks.
And I think I read also in the Boston Globe article that there's now over 3.5 million square feet of office in Boston proper. So to you and to Adam, we'll start with you. Are you seeing that's creating greater demand in the suburban market?
We haven't really seen as many tenants coming out of downtown Boston looking in this area as we had thought there was going to be. We are seeing some, getting some calls from lab groups that, are getting pushed out of Cambridge. As Mike said before, it's just, explosive, that market, and it's just too expensive for them. But, maybe every 6 or 8 weeks, we're getting a tour from a downtown Boston group, one of which is actually in like an hour on Chapel Street there. But for the most part, we haven't seen that many people, coming out to the suburbs, from downtown Boston. So
what is the lab per square foot rent in Cambridge right now?
I'll let Mike answer that. He's more the expert in that area.
It's all over, geographically, it's over $100 a square foot on a triple net basis. If you're in East Cambridge, sort of ground zero near MIT, Kendall Square, we have a project in the Alewife area which obviously tends to be more outward from that area, but it's still on the red line, which is important consideration. And we're kind of like in the 80s there. And that's triple net. Expenses run, 20, $25 a square foot. And one of the trends right now, landlords are giving more TI. So, it's upwards of $180 to $200 a square foot in tenant improvement work that goes, in connection with those sort of rents that you're getting for 7, 10, and 15-year deals.
That's helpful.
In addition to what Mike was saying about the herd mentality for lab, I mean, I've read that there are several examples of because of the office market being the way it is right now, where some landlords are going the adaptive reuse route and converting some high-rise office buildings, converting space in high-rise office buildings to lab, which is a huge bet. It's a huge bet.
And there are some that
Like was saying, the costs of converting it, are so extensive. It's a pretty big bet by several landlords.
I think it's about, I don't know, Mike, if this is true or not, anecdotally from your experience, but from what I've seen and read, it seems like, that conversion can reduce the actual amount of in-person traffic, the number of employees, the number of people that, drive so much of the other daily traffic, restaurants, a little bit of retail. If you've got you may have a third less or more, fewer employees in those buildings as they switch from office to lab.
That's true, but curiously, they're the only ones going into their space these days. So, the lab work continues, and you can't do that from home. But you're right. Yeah, it's less population, office lab population. It's also higher tax revenue for communities, just given the value that's invested into the space.
Clearly. Adam and Rick, do you have additional comments on what's happening in industrial and office?
So, Rick, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it's the same old saw that I've been saying. Industrial, particularly, all sizes of warehouse distribution have been extremely popular, not only with tenants, but certainly with investors as well.
Thank you. Adam?
Yeah, I mean, in our little pocket of Newton and Needham, it's actually been, pretty busy over the last, 4 or 5 months, I'd say, particularly it's strange on some of the projects that we have that haven't really seen much activity over the last couple of years, like at, the AAA building there, we had a whole bunch of space, and in the last, 4 or 5 months, we've signed a bunch of leases, which is great. And, some of them are like, new to the area, like signing a 7-year lease, a new, law firm taking 5-year lease.
Where were they from?
One of them is a therapy practice that has, sites all over the country. Another one, the law firm, is actually in Needham already, but they're like sharing space with someone else. So they're going off and taking their own space.
Right.
Another law firm in the area that's expanding by about 25% and signing a 7-year lease. So it's actually, I think that the renewals are the ones that are a little bit shorter term, maybe 2 or 3 years, just because, there's and the landlords will do it because there's no cost of construction or TI or anything, versus these, new, or these relocations, or, just new to the area businesses. They need work done to the space, and they're comfortable with doing the 5 or 7-year leases. So.
I'll say one thing, that this couldn't be a better time to do the improvements on Needham Street.
I've heard that from other retailers as well, actually. What about, speaking of retailers, I don't want to forget Tina, but actually I'm going to pause for a second before I do, because in addition to having some staff, Maureen Callahan from Representative Denise Garlick's office, I think we actually have the representative herself. I'd like to say a special welcome and thank you for attending the meeting and joining. And I'm not sure, Amy, if you're able to make her a panelist in the event that the good representative would like to say a word or two.
Yes, I just did.
So good morning, Adam, and good morning to everyone. I'm glad to be here. I had a great conversation with Amy yesterday, and I congratulate the town on hiring her. I just want to be sure you know that Maureen has always sat in on these meetings for me. I have been debriefed on every meeting, but I thought going forward, as we want to support small business and we want to develop our economy for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts that is not only sustainable but strong, I want to join these meetings on a more consistent basis and do anything I can to move forward. Amy and I had a chance, and I'm sure Amy will discuss with you the number of the Mass Capital Growth grants that have been given to Massachusetts, in Massachusetts to Needham businesses. And I think Amy has those statistics for us. And that was a great learning opportunity for me as well, because I am very familiar with many of the businesses in Needham, but became acutely aware that I was not familiar with all of them. So want to be a good, strong, productive, positive partner with all of you.
We're grateful to have you and thank you very much. We know and recognize that you're an advocate for, our local businesses in this State House and for creating policy that can make some significant improvement. So we're grateful to have you as a partner, and we're grateful for your personal interest in our businesses and the recovery. And we'll come to Amy shortly as she'll talk about some of those programs and the success that the Needham companies have had as a result. So thank you very much. Tina, are you there and able to chat a little bit about what's happening with retail and your colleagues on the street?
Hi, good morning. Well, typically this is a slow time of year. We're in a down cycle. Things will start picking up, February, March. There are a lot of vacancies, so that is concerning. I think there are a few businesses that are doing pretty well right now. They had a really good holiday season, and that's helped to sustain this down cycle. But I know that quite a few are struggling.
So obviously the core need is customers and business, for the recovery. And I'm sure they're having their own conversations with landlords. Are there other things that I'm sure they're applying for various grants and PPP and so on? I'm sure
It's funny that you guys mentioned the MGCC grant. That it's a very difficult process because I'm in the second round right now of amendments. So you apply, they go through it. This is the second time I've gotten an email saying there are errors or omissions, but they won't tell you what the errors are. So the onus is on the business to try to figure out what the problem is and guess. So again, this is the second time and there are several people that are experiencing the same problem, not just in Needham, but all over the state.
Does that require you hiring a lawyer or an accountant to review the application to figure out what the error is?
My accountant has gone through it. He's helped me with the grant, but there's no indication as to what the problem is. So that's what I'm focusing on right now because the deadline for resubmission is coming up. And if you try to contact MGCC, they tell you that they're either not able or willing to help. So that's been a problem. I know a few people have applied for the second round of PPP, so that's great. So it's not just a combination of getting the customers in, because again, we're in a down cycle and that takes time. It's, people need an immediate injection of cash, and trying to figure out how they're going to get that to kind of bridge them into the spring season is the issue.
So we're now on February 10. So are you thinking that they need a bridge for another 8 weeks to get them into April, or does the spring season start 4 weeks from now at the beginning?
Yeah, For me, for apparel, it's kind of starting to kick off now, but we'll really start to see it pick up in March and April.
Okay, that's helpful. Lise, did you want to mention any other anecdotes or experience or trends that you're seeing in retail as well?
I would concur with what Tina said. Some of the Needham merchants posted their best. They did year over year better with the support of the local community sticking close to home. And it really just depends on your product mix and what people are looking to purchase right now. So they are really hunkering down for the next couple months. We morphed our 100-day challenge campaign into a Shop Dine Needham page on Facebook. I sent out communication asking retailers to participate and post their Valentine's Day offerings. We sent out some social media hearts to thank everybody for the support. To a retailer that I've talked to, they felt the love, and we tried to roll that over into a Valentine's Day promotion, but we got very little. Over 50% opened my email, but nobody did the hearts to date. We did a Valentine's Day curated local gift directory on the chamber, and Greg's been pushing that out in his daily emails. We collected Valentine's Day menus. There's a lot of wonderful options to dine in or dine out for Valentine's Day locally. So we kind of took that opportunity of that special day to rally, get some momentum going, but as an ongoing effort, we'll just continue to prompt. Amy's going to come to our next Needham Business Alliance meeting and talk about possible plans for those empty storefronts. I know that's concerning to all of the community. So they'd like to hear from her on that. And my next meeting with them is the last week of February, and we'll hear from them directly what they might want us to do next.
Question for Tina and I guess Lee. Tina, there are a number of empty storefronts in your little section of Great Plain Avenue. Have you noticed any increased activity from a leasing standpoint? People coming to look at the space or anything like that?
No, one of the former Closet Exchange spaces is a phone fix-it store, which is not great. But no, there hasn't been any activity. The problem is, in addition to what retailers are going through right now, because there's this void and vacancy, it's depressing, right? So it's hard enough to get people to shop up and down Great Plain Avenue because it's such a thoroughfare. Mo and I were talking about this yesterday. You don't have this feeling of quaint and cute like you do in the middle of Wellesley or Dedham or Concord or Arlington. It's just the geography of it and the way that the town is set up. So when you have stores, empty retail, storefronts, it exacerbates the problem. And it just makes it feel like, why would you want to come to Needham Center and shop? There's no feeling of community or any sort of sense that this is, a quaint little place to be. So that's going to be an issue going forward. Because
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, that's where I would really strongly encourage us to try to get John Rufo involved because, from Foreman Place, he did a ton of work for mass development. This is his expertise, is how to create a sense of community. And there are tools you can, he has the capability. And he lives in Needham. He's a neighbor of mine. I know he's super involved, at least with your organization, and maybe you can exert some influence on him.
I was in touch with him this morning.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Will,
Can I ask another question while everybody's here?
please, Mo.
One of the things that's clear is that some of the businesses in our downtown have been able more readily to adapt to the current situation, but others haven't. And I'm wondering, although we have opportunities for them to get extra grants and some financial support, is there any source for technical expertise or methods of adapting that they can access? And can we roll that out to them if there are? The chamber is a potential source. Maybe the state has resources that the can make available to local businesses that we might not be aware of. But I think if they could get some advice that would help them adapt and change to meet the contingencies of this particular situation, both in the short term, which is getting to the spring, but this is going to go on for a bit longer. So even if the weather turns better and the restaurants are more able to thrive, we still have the issue for the retail people.
Hey, Mo, one of the things, this want to address the broader question you asked, which I think is a great one, which is how to get them resources and so forth. But one of the things that, all businesses should be looking at is this employee retention credit that came out at the end of December. So it was part of the Tax Act in December 27th. And most of the businesses are just not, from what we're talking about, they're not understanding how much liquidity is there if they take advantage of this employee retention credit. And historically, you couldn't take a PPP loan, which most of our retailers probably took, and get the credit. Now, under that last Tax Act, you can get both. You just have to be really strategic in how you ask for your forgiveness of PPP. So that's one thing that I don't know who's going to be kind of organizing the communication of some of the stuff that you're talking about, Mo, because I think your broader point is a better one. But that's one thing that we should be bringing up to them.
For the town side, we do have a public information officer. So if we have a list of resources that we can get to her to get the word out, and Amy also is a great source of information for the business community. So we need to arm her as well. But there needs to be, I think, some sort of repository of where these businesses can go to get help, beyond just the resources we can bring to bear as the town.
I'd like to see us actually be able to be a conduit to business and provide some of that. I don't know if we can create some kind of a separate website for us where we could post more information, and in conjunction with the work that our public information officer is doing. In fact, that's going to be coming up effectively next on our agenda as we're talking about the small business committee.
But
Adam, I'm sorry,
while we're here, at least, the chamber has a broad net.
Yes.
So it's not just Needham, it's also Wellesley and Newton now.
Right.
So maybe the chamber can play a role in bringing to bear its resources, working through Amy and Needham and who else in Newton and Wellesley, to provide an access point for
business,
local retail and restaurants. But right now, I think the retail is hurting more than the restaurants, to get them the resources they need. And the point that Matt just made, maybe they're not aware of that. Maybe nobody told Amy about it. So
the technology service, the e-commerce site really isn't our wheelhouse, but we can probably find the right, we can talk to our partners and see if we can find the right person to help do some type of tutorial. I mean, I think Tina was mentoring people in that realm before. In terms of the tax credit, we did just have a CPA firm sit in, the restaurants asked for that specifically for their weekly call. So that was discussed with a Q&A yesterday morning, and tomorrow we're doing the second round PPP questions, and that is broken out as part of the event. To talk about, because people don't know exactly what Matt said. That's huge, and there's a lot of questions around it. So that's totally in the chamber wheelhouse. And Greg's been pushing out information, and we've got some experts coming in on that. The e-commerce is a little trickier for us, but we're happy whatever, we can work through the state or federal or, the SBA, I have to believe, has some of that.
At least maybe I can add to that. I think that many people on this call, but not everyone knows about SCORE, which is a small business administration adjunct, if you will, of mostly retired executives. I do a fair amount with them today. And what I have found, because I do some counseling with different businesses, not necessarily here in Needham, is some of the business fundamentals are things that they can also use help with right now. Finding ways to kind of manage cost or look at their economics or identify where they're overspending, underspending, a variety of activities that maybe aren't as specific as some things Matt's talking about, although there's some folks at SCORE that are really well versed in that as well. But it's just another avenue they may want to pursue. It's free. So that's something they may want to consider.
These are all really great ideas for the short-term survival of restaurants and various retail in downtown Needham. But and you know, I've said this before, from the long-term standpoint of maintaining the health and survival of a downtown retail, we've got to start thinking about the encouraging vertical residential development in and around the downtown, where people can walk out their door and walk to these restaurants and retail, and that would be a source of shopping. People not having to drive and find a parking spot. I think a lot of the more inner city types of areas where you see very active retail and restaurants, it's because there is a built-in customer base right there. I can walk downstairs, walk outside, stroll on the street, sit outside, whatever, and shop locally.
We're gonna come to that. That's right. It's a medium and long-term strategy, Rick. And what Mo and Lise and Stu are really talking about are trying to affect an immediate benefit for in the short term for business.
I agree. That's for the survival. You got to get to the future.
Exactly. And we're going to come to both in a minute. I see, Bob, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to build on Rick's point. Something that I wanted to mention today is the article that was in the Globe yesterday about housing choice. I mean, that seems like something that we should really be focusing on. I had no idea about this. This came as news to me, but it seems like it's right in our purview, and I think Needham would be perfectly suited to take advantage of it. So at some point, I'd like to make that a discussion item.
Yeah, and I think wasn't the town, Mo, I don't know, was the town opposed to the change in the governor's bill?
Mo, you're on mute.
I think we submitted a letter in opposition to the change from 2/3 to majority.
For towns that had met their
10%, yeah.
The 10%, and I think Needham's record is good. And so the position our board took was that we supported the bill, but we thought that there should be an exemption for towns that had done what they should be doing. Nevertheless, I think that bill is good news for us because we are getting into situations where a simple majority in the zoning may help the business community as well as the residential community.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's a reality and I think we should leverage it.
Yeah, I will, if anyone's interested, there was an article, a report that was done in support of the housing bill as it was progressing, looking at the housing market, and it focused on the 128 area,
right,
and how Wellesley is maybe putting housing in their industrial park over off 128, and they specifically focused on Needham and the fact that they have zoning that authorizes housing in the downtown, mixed use with what Rick has talked about. But we've only permitted 10 housing units at the time of the article, but permitted 500 over on the 128 corridor, which sort of defeats the purpose of trying to create a downtown if you're putting your housing out on the highway.
There are some specific challenges to the downtown for sure. And yet I think most of us here recognize the need that Rick has identified, that long-term, the best way to boost commercial activity and to activate the streetscape is with greater density. And there is, I think, some projects we will may be able to mention about potentially of creating a bit more density in the downtown. That's also true running down the spine on Chestnut as well, which I know is a priority for the select board too.
Yeah, and
well,
I mean, the good
to
news,
Tina's point, and I'm not speaking for the board at this point, I'm just, because this is a relatively new way of thinking for us, I think. We have sacrificed traffic efficiency, not sacrificed for, we've promoted traffic efficiency against the creation of a more intimate downtown. And I think if you look at what we did on Chapel Street, which was to reduce the cartway width, so Chapel Street is narrower than it was, that's actually created a better commercial atmosphere along that street. So I think we need to start to rethink about how we're approaching how we process traffic through the downtown. And this is very early stage, obviously, and we haven't had this discussion at my board, but I think we need to start thinking this way.
I think that's helpful. It's certainly an item that's going to be on the small business. Excuse me, the small business. Excuse me. And so I want to take this opportunity now to talk through our next item on the agenda, which is our priorities, the CA priorities 2021, which Amy has circulated. Anne Marie and I, as chair and vice chair, along with Amy as our economic development manager, met last week with Mo and Matt as chair and vice chair of the select board, in addition to Kate and Katie from the town manager's office, to discuss these priorities that our council has been discussing for a little bit. And I will say declaratively, this is the year of recovery. And how can we be in this council most effective to the select board and to business to deliver the greatest value to our business community? And I think, for instance, having Representative Garlick here is very timely, and we're grateful again for your direct participation. We need the business community and they need us. And we've seen their time and again. And the question is, how can we help them through the recovery process? So for 2021, we have 3 areas of focus. And our core areas this year are: 1, small business. It's an obvious priority. 2, we're going to review the zoning in our core commercial districts and find opportunities for new growth and development. We'll take whatever findings we have and any suggestions that we come up with through the course of time. We'll take these to the select board, and I can also help advocate for those on the planning board as well. We're not going to get into the detail of writing the zoning, but we're going to identify some specific areas for improvement, increasing density, certain priorities. Every district will have its own things, perhaps. And then the third priority is we're going to build a cluster-based economic development strategy so we can prioritize the mix of business in town. And that's, those are our core priorities. And so as part of this effort, and with the approval from the select board, we're going to create these 3 committees that you've all have seen. One committee is the Small Business Committee. The second is the Redevelopment Committee. And the third is the Cluster-Based Economic Development Committee. And I'll go through in a second and talk about what these priorities are. But effectively going forward, each of the subcommittees will now be meeting twice a month instead of once a month as a full CEA. Each of the committees will be meeting twice a month, every couple of weeks, to discuss and take action on some very specific goals. And then as a full council, we will begin to meet on a quarterly basis, so we can report in on our findings, we can take any action, vote any recommendations, discuss any challenges, and get a bit of a broader perspective on some of the things that the specific committees will be working through. So that's going to mean a little bit of change in how we are actually meeting. More specifically, each of these committees will come up with tangible goals which will be the first meeting, which is to identify very specific tangible goals that each of the committees can achieve. For example, some of the things that we know we're going to continue doing through the small business committee is to reach out to retail and to the restaurant community, and to continue to understand what their needs are for recovery. Mo and Matt and Lise and Tina, you've all identified some very specific urgent needs, and we want to see how we can best implement those needs and identify others. Part of that will also be some specific training. Stu, you mentioned, for instance, that there are some business operation tasks that a lot of businesses seem to be maybe struggling with. So you, in fact, Stu, might be a very good person to provide and deliver some kind of a training program for a 60-minute or a 90-minute program. And what I mean to say is that the small business will identify, hopefully, to provide quarterly programs to support our small business. So the small business committee will identify what programs to develop, and if you have the resource, the skill, the talent, the knowledge within the CEA to deliver it ourselves, that's great. If not, we'll find external people that can provide the content, and we'll facilitate it probably on Zoom for a while. And we'll continue through the small business committee to help support the select board on some very specific activity that the select board may be considering, for instance, extending deadlines and timeframes to be able to eat and drink outside, and any other actions that we may be thinking through the recovery in the spring and through the summer. And then also we'll be looking at ways, Rick, you've identified, to increase the density in the downtown, including residential. The district-focused redevelopment committee is going to be dealing with that. We're going to go through each of our zoning districts, and we're going to identify where there are areas for improvement to upzone or to change the zoning. We'll look at the use tables. We'll look at the dimensional setbacks. There are a lot of people here on this committee that have some very unique and directly related experience that can help. And I'd like to return back to that activity, because we can be a force for change, and we can really make a big improvement. One of the other elements that this committee will be looking at is really developing a marketing strategy to promote Needham as a whole in business. We'll obviously, Lise, want to work closely with you. We'll want to develop some very specific collateral marketing materials, and then develop some kind of a program to roll out and implement our marketing strategy so that we're front and center on site selectors' minds. And so we're thinking about perhaps having an event, some kind of a party when we can return to live events. That's obviously not an immediate thing, but it will come up hopefully towards the third quarter, where we can almost have like a launch party of doing business in Needham. And to Representative Garlick, we'd love to be able to work with your office to help boost the profile, Needham's profile, through mass development and other state agencies and so on. The third committee is this cluster-based economic development committee, and we've talked a little bit about this before. This really comes up as really picking up the work that we did with our consultants from Babson last year, which had started to build an inventory of all business in town. So first, one of our first steps will be to ensure that we have a good data collection. We'll need to update the list and determine and make sure that it's accurate. There's going to obviously be some substantial changes as a result of the pandemic, and yet we want to make sure that we have a strong base of information. The reason why we're doing that is because once we categorize our business, then we can start identifying priority mix of use in town. And typically what we find, for instance, is in the information technology or in the media sector, we have some marketing companies here, we have news agencies here, and we have some editing, we have some marketing businesses, but they're all kind of disparate and they're not necessarily well connected. What bridges can we provide to that community that can attract additional like businesses as part of each sector's ecosystem? Life sciences is another area. We have one hospital that's operates as a pretty sizable business in town. We have a second hospital coming coming soon, and there are also some other life science and biotech companies here, and we want to integrate it more and identify what other elements like lab space are missing, that and how can we attract those missing elements, because what's ultimately happening is that it creates higher paying jobs in town, and it supports and boosts the economic activity for the whole sector. So we're going to take a look at developing an economic development strategy that's based on identifying our top clusters and growing those clusters as a priority for a bit of more of a long-term plan. So the next point is, I'm not sure if you've all seen the subcommittee assignments. I can quickly read out who's on which assignment, and I appreciate your patience as I've gone through a bit of this dense material. On the Small Business Committee right now, we have Tina, Lise, Virginia, and Mo. On the District-Focused Redevelopment Committee, myself, Bob, Adam, Rick, and Mike Wilcox. On the Cluster-Based Economic Development Committee, right now we have, also I should add that Matt Telkoff is part of the District Redevelopment Committee. The Cluster-Based Economic Development Committee includes Stuart, Glenn, Bill Day, Anne Marie, and David Montgomery. That's how it sits as of today. Does anybody have any questions so far? Wow, well, that's great. Good.
No, David has a question.
Oh, good. Thanks very much, Amy. David, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. Sorry about that. I have one sort of, I think, big picture question. It seems to me, I think this is a great early start here on revisioning this. I'm assuming that our old committees are by definition going away. I mean, we're reframing them in this new context. And then I guess my other question is there, it strikes me that some of the work of these committees may be potentially at odds with each other or coming at things from different angles, and there will be a need to integrate their work. And for instance, I'm not just, this is what lawyers do. We think of how things can go wrong. But if one group of folks were pushing for redeveloping an area because, hey, higher use, let's do this. But others were saying, the group of people who will be displaced by that are precisely the small businesses we're trying to bolster. There could be some tension there. And I'm just curious what the thoughts are about how will that get balanced? Is that the work of our committee still, or is that the work of the other, like the board of the select board that we're giving advice to?
I think that's a great question, and thanks for asking it. I having grown up in a family of lawyers, I can appreciate your sentiment. There may be, I think part of this process may identify some tension in that way. I think that that tension can actually identify opportunities. And I think it's going to be imperative for us to deliver to the business community, some consensus. We have to be able to identify some tough areas and figure out solutions and how we resolve that. We'll do that together. That's why the CEA itself is going to continue. And as each of these subcommittees identify certain opportunities, there may be certain unintended consequences. That's why on a quarterly basis, the CEA as a whole will discuss any of those potential conflicts and think through some of those specific solutions. We
Can I
can't.
say something also, Adam?
Please, Mo.
This is not a policy committee, it's an advisory committee. So there may be conflicting recommendations, which, as Adam points out, will get resolved in the umbrella committee. But ultimately, the select board, or in some cases, the planning board, is going to have to be making policy recommendations, many of which will go to town meeting, but they'll be coming from those boards that have a policy burden. This is a group of people who have expertise, who can provide good advice. And yes, some of the advice is going to be trying to reconcile recommendations that affect small business at the expense of, let's say, the example from earlier, traffic. But that has to be reconciled by the select board and or the planning board. And Amy is sort of the key role here because she is the voice of the town to the business community.
Right.
And she communicates both ways and effectively. So I don't know if that answers your question from the select board perspective, David.
Well, I suppose it does. I mean, I think this will have to come out in the, we'll wait and see how it works. I think it's obviously a work in progress. I still not entirely clear. If we meet twice a week twice a month as a subcommittee, are we also meeting once a month as the main committee?
No.
So we're going from 1 to 3 meetings a month, or are we meeting as a main committee? Is that becoming a quarterly thing on top of? I mean, it's a significant change in time commitment.
So you're right, and the full CEA will meet we'll meet once a quarter. If we have to meet before that, I'll convene a meeting, and you'll get noticed for it, of course. But generally, we're going to plan on as this full CEA meeting on a quarterly basis, and that the subcommittees will be doing the work and we'll be meeting we'll be meeting twice a month.
Can I make a suggestion on that, Adam?
Yes, please.
It may be that a particular subcommittee may decide on a work schedule that doesn't require a semi-monthly meeting.
Right.
Or a bi-month, I don't know, twice a month.
Right.
So I think that's up for the committee. The other thing is that these meetings tend to go for an hour and a half, this larger group meeting.
Right.
It may well be that those smaller groups can meet more efficiently.
Exactly. That's right.
And they'll also have more flexibility with respect to when they schedule their meetings. Because for some folks here, this is not an optimal time.
Right. That's also true. So, and I appreciate you bringing these points up. Does anybody else have any other comments?
And I could see the subcommittee for small business and retail morphing that into, I hold a monthly meeting for the Needham Business Alliance. So I think it would behoove that subcommittee to attend that meeting. And that could be one of our semi-monthly meetings, because that's where I get all my information from. So instead of me attending and then meeting again so I do agree with Mo that depending on the subcommittee, there might be additional ways to stay abreast of everything going on.
Yeah, and I would say this is fluid. And to Mo's point, and Lisa's, there's a way for each subcommittee to sort of decide as a team the work schedule. But I think sort of the overarching goal here is to make this advisory committee more dynamic and producing deliverables to the Board of Selectmen instead of sort of these monthly meetings we have that are just sort of briefings. So there is going to be a level of commitment, I think, on being, being engaged.
That's right. So we'll start in 2 weeks. Amy will set up, and I will chat with Anne Marie, and we'll set up a schedule for when the committees will start to meet. And then it will be a bit of a fluid process, and yet we want to immediately start setting goals for these, some specific workable goals for each of these committees, and then start doing the work and taking the action. Just for clarity on the district refocusing committee, the basically rezoning committee, I don't intend for us to come up with a solution on zoning immediately for every district in town. There's a lot that's going to go through this with the planning department, with the planning board, with the select board, and so on. But it's an opportunity for us from a business point of view to look at the dynamics. Maybe we take 2 or 3 months just to focus on one specific district, and then see what we find, and then we'll and so on. So I don't think that we're going to hit all of those districts all at once. I think we're going to take a look at it, one at a time, so we can deliver on real, take a more significant in-depth look at these things. So thank you all very much. I'd like to now turn our attention on the agenda to the Highway Commercial 1 update. Lee, do you want to run us through where we've been and where we're going next?
Sure. Many of you may have attended the community meeting that we held last week on February the 3rd, where we did a presentation to the community as a whole about where we had been on the highway commercial rezoning in the past, the changes that we were proposing to make to the changes, largely in terms of density, in terms of the FAR, and in terms of height standards, and the introduction of a new use, which is really a residential use to what was the original proposal. And at that meeting, we had a presentation of the proposed zoning framework, and a presentation of an urban design plan in terms of how that zoning would actually play out in terms of an as-of-right zoning of 1.0 and a special permit zoning at 1.3. And then also a presentation by the traffic consultant that we had engaged in terms of what the impacts would be on the infrastructure and the mitigation that would be required to mitigate the worst case build out scenario. There was also a brief presentation by Marianne Cooley on the fiscal impacts of the study, relying in large part on the analysis that was done in 2019 that looked at the commercial uses in particular, at a build out at the 1 and the 1.3, and we're currently working with a consultant to actually model what the impacts fiscally would be now with the introduction of housing at a level of 240 units. So at the meeting, amazingly, there were at one point in time, I think 185 people logged into Zoom, and I've done these planning meetings and community meetings in the past, and when we get 100 or 120, I feel like we're successful. So this was really a great attendance. And we got a lot of questions from residents. I think Adam did an excellent job of fielding the questions and addressing them. And we've gotten other questions coming in by email subsequent to the meeting. And our plan is to put together some frequently asked questions that we're going to post on the internet after we sift through these questions and identify the framework under which the questions are being asked. So moving forward, I've updated the zoning article itself, which implements this urban design plan in the form that the zoning was presented to the community. That draft is scheduled to go in front of the planning board next week, Tuesday. They'll make whatever modifications they want to make to the draft. And then it will go to the selectmen for a referral back to us to start the hearing process on the article. And the public hearing is now planned for March the 16th. So I don't know, Adam, is there anything else that I missed that you would like to cover?
I gotta unmute myself. I think I did now. I think that's pretty good. So we're the planning board has is going to have a public hearing on March 16th to present the formal language of the zoning change, and then we're heading towards town meeting. Mo, do you have an idea if we're on track to remain with a May town meeting, or is it possible that we may extend out a little bit? You're on mute, Mo. I'm sorry.
This muting and unmuting challenges everybody from time to time. We're on track for a May town meeting so far.
That's great. Okay.
We're required to have a May town meeting no earlier than the first Monday in May. We can extend that. We are free to have a special town meeting anytime.
Interesting. Okay.
So we're working on that. Whatever we do, it's extremely likely that it will be an outdoor town meeting. So it will be governed by the weather and daylight.
Right. And set up in a similar way as our more recent ones where we've
if I had to guess, I would say yes, but I wouldn't say that that's totally the range of possibility, but yeah, highly likely.
Okay. And we can chat through the details another time, but thank you. That's good guidance.
No, it's a work in progress. We're working with the select board is working with the moderator, trying to figure out how to do this, and then also trying to figure out whether the governor's emergency situation, the guidelines will change enough to give us more flexibility or less. So, but so far it's been successful. And I think it's likely that we'll have presentations online. That's been effective. I think what we need to do is make sure that we encourage people to actually view those, because sometimes they don't. But that makes it a much more streamlined meeting, and it gives for better presentation, I think.
That's right. I think it's been very effective. Thank you. Bob, I see that your hand's up.
Just curious if you heard anything at that meeting last week that's going to dramatically change the articles.
Great question.
Well, Lee can help me with this in a second. We've heard some support. We've heard actually a bit of a mix. We've heard some people calling for an increase in density, and we've heard some people advocate for less density. We've heard a little bit on greater height and some people suggesting less height. There has been on social media quite a bit of activity. A number of residents are advocating for what's that?
I just laughed. I'm sorry, because I looked at some of the social media.
They're advocating for use of the place as a rec center. I think that there are some in town who think that property is actually public land. There's a misunderstanding that many people believe that as this is private land, that the town can just easily determine what that we can put a rec center in, and we're trying to clarify.
I'd say they just don't care.
And
I don't think it's that they don't know. They just don't care.
That's right.
People are very free with other people's property, but
yeah. So there's been some that have suggested, in fact, instead of having two separate setbacks off Highland and Gould, to actually now have three separate setbacks. So there would be one height within between 20 and 200 feet of Highland and Gould, and then at 200 feet it goes up, and then another 150 feet in, it'd be a very stepped three-tiered height system. So there are a lot of things I think that we have to work in the balance. That planning board is going to have to, go through these comments, and I think remain firm on a very strong proposal, because it doesn't take much before, if we cut out some of the incentives for development through the zoning, then we lose an opportunity, and we don't want that to happen. Rick, go ahead. I see your hand up.
Yeah, I was on the Zoom meeting off and on, and Lee and Adam, I got to congratulate you guys on running a terrific show, and Natasha as well, and the traffic consultant. I thought you guys did an amazing job. I'm not a big proponent of scare tactics, but I don't know if the point was emphasized enough or at all of what is allowed by right on that site now. With out in the commercial market, with Amazon paying crazy numbers for great locations. I don't know what could be built there, 300,000 square feet, a warehouse by right, something like that. And I don't know what the height, offhand, I don't know what the height restriction is right now.
2 stories.
2 stories. Is it 24 feet?
40, I have to, 35 feet, I think. I have to check it.
35 feet. Okay, so by right, I don't know if people understand that 300,000 square feet of a mass, big, 35-foot high building could actually be built on that site right now. And again, I'm not a big proponent of scare tactics, but I think people need to understand the alternative and what's currently allowed in zoning.
It's that we're communicating that. We're working on that as part of the communication strategy. It's true. And just to give everyone else context, although many people in this on our Zoom today are real estate pros, but 300,000 square feet of development is basically like having three BJ's or 3 Costco's stacked on top of each other. It's not quite the same height, but those stores are typically 100,000 square feet. So that's right at the gateway. That's what that could look like. And it could also be not just an Amazon store, but it could be a fulfillment center for it could be a fulfillment center for Home Depot or for Walmart or for
Wayfair or
Wayfair, exactly.
Yeah.
So there is.
And that creates, pretty amazing practically 24/7 truck traffic.
Exactly.
In that area. And according to, and Lee, I'll defer to you, according to the current zoning, that's allowed by right.
Yes.
Yeah, but you're right, Rick, about the perception that scare tactics. So although that people need to understand that, how that's presented has got to be done in a very careful way, because we don't want to make people feel that they're being scared.
Right.
That's one. Two, the reason I guffawed is I check social media now because for obvious reasons. I'm now involved in a campaign that requires me to look at that. I don't generally go there because I see that the comments there are not always responsible, and they have currency because they're on a screen. So I would encourage anybody who's interested in this to, if people have comments, they should get them to the planning board directly, and we should not be relying on what people say off the cuff on social media.
One of the things that, I don't know, again, I'm not a big proponent of scare tactics, but it might be interesting to see Natasha put together a scenario of what is currently allowed by right.
She actually did.
A monolithic 35-foot high, 300,000 square foot with truck bays all around it.
She did. We did not use that slide, but we're not reaching the square footage threshold that you're talking about for an Amazon building because of the FAR and the parking requirements.
Yep.
So, so a warehouse building under the examples that Natasha prepared, and I'll be glad to send you those slides, doesn't get you to a threshold facility the size of what Amazon's looking for. It gets you to a warehouse use
Yeah.
But the parking constraint, and the FAR on that site doesn't create the kind of the kind of use that you're talking about.
Yeah.
And
Amazon's current requirements are in the 1.2 million square foot range for a warehouse.
Well, you can't put that on the site under the existing FAR. I mean, you could have a smaller facility, and that's what the zoning allows. We chose not to present that circumstance at this meeting.
Yeah.
Although we may,
I can understand why, but I think people have to understand this.
right.
That we're trying to improve and protect them from, what possibly could happen, because, going back to comments that I have about the industrial market, people are paying crazy prices right now for well-located industrial sites, especially along 128, because most of it has been zoned out. And right now, warehouse distribution, well, as always, warehouse distribution, a location is very, very important. Access to major highways is very, very important. And over the years, along 128, most of that use has been zoned out. So anything that's remaining is from an investment standpoint, gathering very, very high prices.
Well, we recognize that the demand for that sector remains strong, and that geography kind of fits right in with what you're talking about. So that's true. I now want to turn on our agenda to and go back to Amy for her Economic Development Manager's report.
Sure. In the interest of time, I will keep it brief. Just to follow up on the conversation that took place earlier, I am in regular touch with the small business community. I often choose to, take to the streets and walk around and pop into the businesses directly to talk to them, but also continue to share information on free webinars and resources that are available to the small business community. As Stu mentioned, SCORE is a great resource, the Center for Women in Enterprise. Certainly the Chamber has a number of free resources for the small businesses. So that is taking place, and I continue to do that. Anything I come across, I'm hungry for information when it comes to anything that can help the small business community. And I'm on, probably about 101 different, email lists from different state agencies and nonprofits. But certainly if anybody comes across anything that you think, there's a possibility I may not have seen, please, I encourage you to share it with me, because I always look for an excuse to reach out to the business community and share anything that might be even remotely helpful for them. As Representative Garlick mentioned, we had a lovely meeting yesterday afternoon, and one of the things that we talked about were the grants that were awarded to Needham businesses for the Mass Growth Capital Corporation. 47 Needham businesses were awarded grants for a total of $2.6 million, which is lovely. I understand that there is still some funding left available sort of in this pot. As Tina mentioned, there are some businesses that are asking to, they're being asked to, reapply or to, take a look at their application. I'm going to see what I can do as far as finding resources to help these businesses and answer questions. Actually, Anne Marie was very helpful in providing a direct contact over at MGCC recently, but it is frustrating that these businesses are hearing that their applications are missing information, or there's something wrong with it, and yet aren't being given specifics as to how and why. So out of those 47 Needham businesses, 10 restaurants actually received grants, 5 gyms, 6 salons, and 3 retailers, but not sort of the mom and pop retail shops in Needham Center and Needham Heights. The franchises are not supposed to receive awards. There was one in Needham that received one. I'm certainly not going to call them out, because one of the concerns we had with franchises is that they are individually owned. They have these license agreements with their ownership companies, but it's the owners that are putting their own resources into these businesses to ensure their success. So there has been some frustration that franchises have not been eligible. So one did receive, and then another franchise locally reached out to me and said, this is really disappointing that I was told I wasn't eligible yet. someone else in Needham received one. So certainly going to try to get some more information on that. I was approached by my predecessor, Deborah Balin, over in Newton a couple of weeks ago to inquire if Needham would be interested in partnering on a regional grant through the Mass Office of Business Development. It was a grant that was just announced and the turnaround time was pretty quick, but we are submitting a grant, which is actually due by the end of the day today. The Newton team was really terrific in pulling this all together, and I partnered with them and provided data, but they did, the lion's share of the work. But the grant is going to be seeking funding to actually address the vacant storefront issues that we've had in Needham Center and certainly in the villages around Newton. But we're looking to put some pop-up shops and engage the artist community and the maker community for these particular vacancies. So I've, been cultivating the relationships with the commercial property owners in Needham Center. And certainly the goal is, for the entire town, but particularly in the areas where there are vacancies. And I've had great conversations, getting a better understanding of what kind of interest they're getting in these spaces. In fact, I spoke to Nancy Farrow of Sullivan Real Estate, who's actually Tina's landlord, but they own multiple properties. And they have a few vacancies right now. And she said there's actually been considerable interest. They haven't signed any leases yet, but there has been interest. And I asked her about her potential interest in wanting to display artwork from local artists. Actually been in partnership with Charlie Nanda of the Needham Council on Arts and Culture. I actually staff that committee now. And so Charlie's got great experience in public art displays. And so we've been putting our heads together to figure out how we can make the vacant storefronts in Needham Center, more aesthetically appealing and create more of a destination, create a reason for folks to, another reason for them to, stroll down Great Plain Ave and Chestnut Street, what have you. So that's in the works. So there are things going on behind the scenes to address the vacant storefronts. Just so everyone knows, it's something that continues to be very high on my priority list. It's on my radar, and we're moving forward with plans on that. And again, Representative Garlick offered to send a letter of support for our grant application, and we're very hopeful. So everyone, please keep their fingers crossed, because it would certainly be great. There is a woman who is very involved with the chamber, Allison Yee of Up Next, who actually we are looking to have help facilitate these pop-up stores. So this is what she does. She's done this very successfully in other communities, at the street in Chestnut Hill and in other various downtowns, and this is her area of expertise. So the grant application actually includes funding to a funding request to hire her to help actually orchestrate all of this. So I'll certainly keep you posted on all of that. I attended last Friday morning a meeting for the N Squared Innovation District. Thanks for Mo for connecting the dots on that. But under the umbrella of the chamber, and Mike Wilcox was there. Nice to see a familiar face. But again, great opportunity to connect with the larger business community and make some introductions as well. And then last week, I also had a first meeting with a group of Boston College students, seniors who are in a real estate management program under the direction of Professor Ed Chazen of the Carroll School of Management. There's a group of 6 seniors who were hand selected by Professor Chazen, who are going to be studying the mixed use 128 district, which is that district, if you're not familiar with it, it's off Highland Avenue, sort of behind where Chef Mike's and Spiga is, a kind of an industrial area across from the N Squared district or Needham Crossing district as well. So there's a lot of opportunity. So they're going to take a look at that district and see, what might be able to be done to perhaps create greater access to not only the Charles River, but is there, better use of some of the properties in there. So that's an area I know that the CEA has had their eye on for a while. And then just a couple other quick updates. Let's see. Tina already mentioned that there's a new phone and computer repair shop that went in on Great Plain Ave. Other than that, we've had no new businesses opening, but we also haven't had anybody close either. So that's encouraging. And then lastly, I just wanted to mention, I continue to attend the biweekly meetings with other economic development directors in the area. And we talk about, best practices and, regulatory hurdles that we each face. And I just want to say that I feel really fortunate to be working in a town that, the left hand is talking to the right hand, and that we've got tremendous support from the elected boards, the select board, the planning board's been terrific, and our public health department, our building inspector. I hear stories from other towns where they continue to have to jump very big hurdles. And I feel very fortunate that we have a great, team of folks in place to support the business community. So, sometimes it helps comparing ourselves to like communities. And I think we're very fortunate here in Needham. So that concludes my report.
Thank you very much, Amy. Lee, do you have anything to report on planning and development permits that are issued or coming up?
Okay, I would just say, I think I mentioned this at the last meeting, that the permit for Children's Hospital to move forward was issued by the planning board in early January. So the appeal period is run on that. So that project is now a go. I'm sure most of you noticed the TripAdvisor building is being used now as a vaccination site. And the town was very creative in terms of how it allowed that to move forward, because that zoning use is not allowed under our zoning program. But creatively, the Board of Health basically declared a health emergency, which enabled the building department to actually issue the permits to implement that use. So we all moved very quickly to get that off the ground. And I think the facility actually opened last week. And then in terms of looking forward, I expect to get the permit filed for the redevelopment in Avery Square of the independent living units and assisted living units in the old Carter's building. That was the 155 dwelling units, of which I think 72 are going to be independent units, 55 assisted, and 28 memory units. And I think the planning board will probably be holding the public hearing, if we go forward on the anticipated schedule, on April the 6th. And then lastly, in terms of questions that have been raised about folks' interest in doing mixed use developments in the center, I still really can't disclose or talk about the specific projects. I will tell you that there are 3 folks that are interested in doing redevelopment. And so it looks encouraging on 3 very strategic properties, any of which would move forward would be a tremendous asset in improvement in the center. I think looking at bringing in that kind of vertical residential development that Rick had advocated for earlier. So there are folks that are looking at using the framework of the zoning to actually make those changes.
That's great. Thank you very much. And we're hoping that we can build in that vertical density. Does anybody else have any other business? Any comments or questions? I don't see any. I'd like to thank everybody for attending. A special thank you to Representative Denise Garlick for joining. We'll reach out to your office to coordinate. It sounds like you'd be particularly interested in working with the small business committee. So we'll reach out to make sure that you're coordinated and have all the information and are able to participate at your schedule, which I know is pretty robust. And everybody else, we will send out some meeting schedules coming up for the committee, so stay tuned. We intend to start in roughly 2 weeks. And again, the first piece of assignment is going to be to establish some specific achievable goals for each of these subcommittees, and then we'll all set about to do the work to achieve those goals. So I'm very grateful for everybody's participation. This is going to be a big year of recovery. It's going to require all hands on deck. We have some extraordinary talent, skill sets, and a network of relationships here that can really rise to the occasion. So I'm grateful to be working with such an incredible and intelligent group and enthusiastic group. So thank you for embracing the change and how we set up these committees and our work schedule and for the work that you're going to do. And with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
May I have?
Second.
Thank you. So we have motion is moved by Mo Handel, seconded by Stu Agler, and any discussion? Seeing none, I'm going to call for a vote. Please vote in the affirmative as I call your name, or negative for that matter. Mo Handel,
Yes.
Stu,
Yes.
Louise,
Yes.
Matt.
Yes.
Rick,
Yes.
Glenn,
Yes.
Bob,
Yes.
Mike.
Yes.
Chair is aye. The motion carries. We sit adjourned. Thank you all very much.
Thanks, Adam.
Thanks,
Thanks.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
See you later.
Thanks.